Namaste, everyone. This is Jody Cleary speaking to tell you that due to many requests, I am posting to Souljourns my husband Ted Henry's talk given to the Sai Baba Center in Los Angeles on August 6, 2017. I know you'll enjoy it. Love to all.
My humblest pranams at the divine lotus feet of our beloved Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba. It is a distinct honor and a distinct pleasure, but I want to begin formally as much as I can by extending my gratitude, special thanks to Mike Congleton, for two reasons. The most obvious is because it's a pleasure to be here before you today. But it was an unbelievable invitation Mike gave to me back in the year 2008. Now, I say unbelievable, and it sounds like that might be a slight exaggeration. Of course, I'm a journalist, and they're known to exaggerate. And worse yet, I'm a television journalist, and goodness knows they can use hyperbole from time to time. But this is not an exaggeration, because it was on a winter day. I can't think of winter in India and Puttaparthi, but it was in late December in 2008, sitting on the marble floor in the Sai Colwyn Hall, and Mike comes up and taps me on the shoulder and whispers in my ear, "How would you like to speak in the divine presence on Christmas Day, 4 days hence?" And I looked at him and I said, "Good joke, Mike." I didn't believe him for a second, but he kept that gaze and that look, that feeling of expectation, which I could read right through as if this is not a joke, this is real. And the more I sensed that it was real, he was asking me to speak in the divine presence on Christmas Day, the more my heart started to flutter in all ways that aren't healthy. I was very scared, very upset, completely at a loss to even know what to say to Mike, let alone to what to say in the divine presence 4 days hence on Christmas Day. More on that a little bit later. I just wanted to say that's not an exaggeration. It was the invitation of a lifetime. I've profited from it, Mike, in many, many different ways, and I'm forever grateful. For whatever reason you came up to me, I'm forever grateful. So thank you very much.
Swami made me do it.
Swami made him do it. Swami? Jody and I are very happy to be here. Thanks for the warmth extended to Jody and to me. She's by far the smarter of the two of us. I mean, I'm not that dumb. That's why I married her. I knew she was very, very smart, in addition to being a wonderful spiritual seeker, in addition to being an all-around saintly woman. She prefers not to talk at opportunities like this, and this is why she's smarter. She can't get herself into trouble. That's not the real reason. The real reason is because she knows who's out there, and she knows how many of you have loved Swami far longer than we have. You have a wealth of experiences and knowledge and insight. And between the two of us, we can't hold a candle to any of you standing up here if we called on you by name to speak about Baba. Well, as you can see, I'm not that smart, and I'm here. But I don't stand here as a teacher or as a professor of any kind. I stand here rather as an aging, almost 72-year-old student. I'm a perennial student when it comes to all things spiritual. And I'm a grateful student because one of the great lessons of my life came just about 50 years ago. I don't know the date or the year even, but it was approximately 50 years ago when, after being a C student in grade school, a C student in high school, a C student all the way through my college years, only later did I come to understand that it was Baba who instilled in me at that point in my life, when I reached 20, an insatiable, burning curiosity for all matters spiritual. And they led me to him. I didn't know it at the time. I wasn't quite sure what I was in for, but I speak as a student still learning up here today. Teachers, those with all the experience that so many people for so many years have stood here and talked to you about before, I actually think they could speak for hours up here because of their understanding and their many experiences. Well, I stand here as this aging student with notes in hand, as a good student might. Good students usually use notes, but good Baba students never use notes. So I have a way to go just to catch up with Baba students, because I still rely on them so I don't stray. I was tied to a teleprompter for 44 years, more or less, for most of 44 years. And you never got to stray and say anything outside of what's on the printed page. And if you give me a chance to talk, and Jody knows this, I'll wander all over the universe with my comments and never stay on target. So this is a chance to really stay close to the program with my notes here. I believe actually that giving a talk is one way of measuring a person's growth spiritually, because it forces you to come to terms with where you are in your own head, and more importantly, in your own heart. I'll give you an example of that. I challenged a man once to speak from his cutting edge of his spiritual awareness, and he shocked me with what he said. 20 years ago at a spiritual symposium in Cleveland, our hometown, I was chosen to introduce one of the foremost spiritual teachers in the world, Professor Emeritus Dr. Houston Smith from Berkeley up the street from here. I'm not quite sure why I was chosen. Somebody knew that I had a keen interest in all matters spiritual, even though I was a newscaster, and they invited me to come, and I was really, really gratified to be at Houston Smith's presence. He's known because of his 6-part series on public broadcasting back in the day with Bill Moyers. He's known mostly around the world because he wrote the second most sold book in English in the world, if you follow that, next to the Bible. The second most purchased book in English in the world next to the Bible, the book The Religions of Man, eventually retitled The Religions of the World. He knew something about what he was talking about. He was raised and grew up in China, the son of missionaries, came to the States, got himself a great education, and found that he didn't fall too far from the tree with his interest in God, as his parents had till they died. And he pursued it with vigor for the rest of his life, and just died several months ago at the age of 97 in Berkeley. He visited Sai Baba's ashram in Puttaparthi. He was there in Puttaparthi when world-famous jazz musician Maynard Ferguson was there to receive an enormous diamond ring from Baba's hand. He lived many of the world's religions he talked about, he wrote about. His audience in Cleveland was made up of members of 17 of the world's religions and spiritual traditions who were there gathered to hear him talk. It was there where I met Jody Cleary for the first time. And how did I meet her there? She brought her Sai Baba contingency from Cleveland, the Sai Center there, to listen to Houston Smith. Well, one thing kind of led to another, and I spotted her way out there in the audience, and I was very shy and very timid, but long story short, we met each other, and here we are today as husband and wife. Backstage, just about 10 minutes before this curtain went up, and I was supposed to be introducing Houston Smith, I approached him with great audacity, with great boldness, actually quite foolish of me to even be so presumptuous. And I challenged him to tear up his prepared talks to this august body and to speak from that cutting edge I referred to earlier, that cutting edge of his spiritual awareness. Where was he now in the school of his own spiritual evolution? Much more so than he wrote about so eloquently in his book that sold around the world. And all he did was to stare at me. And I wasn't quite sure if he heard me or if I didn't say it correctly. But then he finally said, and he pointed to a chair over in the corner, and I forever felt that he was going to tell me to go and sit there and be quiet. He said, "See that chair over there? I'm going to go over there right now, young man. I don't know who you are. I don't know where that question came from. And I'm going to sit there for every second I have in the 10 minutes before my talk and meditate on your presumptuous question." And he did, and he came back and he said, "You got a deal. I won't give up all my talk. I will reserve part of it for the end, but I will try my best to speak it from the cutting edge of where I am as a spiritual student myself, growing that way." Well, that night, Houston Smith, who wrote the book on religion and spirituality in a manner of speaking, spoke of his most recent growth, which for the first time made me think of spiritual growth as being a class we sign up for in school. Except it's a class that never ends. We're all in that classroom. There's no recess, there's no lunch hour, there's no summer vacation, there's no diploma, there's no graduation. And on the last day of your life, we find ourselves still in that school. And it's my hunch, Swami, that after we draw our last breath, the classroom exercises continue. I'll find out later, as we all will. So, what is the lesson in the school that Ted Henry's in right now? The Baba instilled in me 50 years ago this curiosity to learn as much as I could. What is the lesson that I have heard and learned and relearned 100 times, and maybe it was only on the 101st time that I started to pay attention to this recurring theme? Baba's own words, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? That he has us all asking, and very few of us know how to answer it. If you ask any of my 5 siblings or friends or schoolmates from 50 years ago, my workmates from 10 years ago, they'll tell you, Ted, oh yes, he's the one who's always walking around in his stocking feet at work mumbling, who am I? Why am I here? And what is it all about? And I've done that since the time I can remember when I was a child. I mean, I must have been 7 when I first have memories of wondering, who is it that I am? Well, I never thought I'd ever know. But like all of you, I now know who I am and why I'm here and what it's all about. I don't know a whole lot, but I know a little bit how to answer those questions. And I'm very grateful I'm here. So the lesson I'm really wanting to talk about today is on that same line, in that same vein. Baba's definitively his most important lesson for each and every one of us: to awaken. To awaken the truth of who we really are. Not wait 15, 25 lifetimes, but maybe in 15 or 25 weeks, or maybe in 15 or 25 days. In other words, I am God, I am God, I am no different from God. It makes my skin shiver whenever I hear myself saying those words. I think of the arrogance and the pomposity. Why would anybody ever say that? Yet that's the lesson he has us pointed to almost for every waking hour of our lives, if we listen to him closely enough. Don't become the high C, as Phyllis Crystal would always say in her talks, probably here and elsewhere around the world, and in the books that she wrote. Don't become the higher consciousness. Be the higher consciousness. Al Drucker, a longtime Baba devotee, a physicist who turned to Baba for all sorts of reasons and who grew enormously because of Baba in his heart and at the end of his arm. He worked for many, many years teaching in the schools over in Puttaparthi. He got thrown out of the ashram 6 times for being a bad boy in ways that he never quite understood, but took it with a grain of salt, knowing that this is in my best interest. Baba will let me know in due time why this is happening to me. Not 1 time, which would be crucial enough for anybody's lifetime, but 6 times. And he was perplexed when Baba would come to him for 2, I think maybe 3 years in a row, and pull him into the interview room and say, Christmas is coming in 4 days. I want you to be the speaker to the gathering of people from the Western worlds and from Christianity who will be here today. You be the speaker. And Al Drucker would say, Swami, my beloved Swami, I don't want to say you got it wrong, but I'm a Jew. And Swami would say, but Jesus is a Jew. Speak. Speak on Christmas Day. Well, he regaled me with many stories about Baba because I met him during the sweet years of his life, toward the end of Al Drucker's life. And the message that Phyllis had was always the message that Al Drucker had for me. Ted, don't go around chasing who you are. Don't go looking too far. Don't look beyond the end of your nose. Don't try to become. Be. Just be the real you. As you all know, it's easier said than done, but I'm still taking those words to heart. Jody and I have recently, I think I can say this, at least for myself, and I think for Jody too, dedicated the rest of our lives to finding out who we are and to following through with Baba's biggest command for us. But I have to tell you, with no equivocation whatsoever, it is a lonely path. It is a difficult, arduous journey. we can't seem to get a lot of people to want to share our enthusiasm. And as Jody says, what can you say about Advaita other than define it? And she says, what is there to contribute to the conversation of becoming part of the non-dualistic world of oneness beyond just using those words? I don't think many of us have a clue what lies ahead of us. And yet the challenge is there, and I'm sure hundreds of times you've played Baba's words, ordering us, commanding us to do that in this lifetime, to work towards that awareness of who we really are. Father Charles Agata, when I first had a chance to meet him outside the Western Canteen, and I went up to him and said, you've got to say Mass here on Christmas Day. That's another story, but he was shocked that anybody would ever think he would be allowed as a Catholic priest to say Mass on Christmas Day at Prashanti Nilayam. And I went to Mr. Chakravarti and others, and they said, well, we'll see. Well, how will I know? Well, you'll know. We'll tell you what he says. I said, what, who says? We'll ask Baba about that. And Baba said, yes, do that. Father Charles Ogata saw my struggle with self-identification and said, Ted, I want to tell you something. It's a Baba message, but it fits you to a T. You know there's 3 Teds, don't you? You've all heard this many times. There's the Ted thinks he is. There's the Ted Jody thinks I am. The Ted Michael thinks I am. And then there's the real Ted. There won't be very many of us, I suspect, ever getting to know the truth of our genuine identity before this illusory lifetime ends. But talk about duty. I think it's our duty to try to the best of our ability. There's lots of reasons why people don't. Mostly it's because I think they're very, very busy. They're very distracted. They have all sorts of duties to family, fears to contend with, health issues, children who are errant perhaps for a moment or two, causing them consternation, making a living, providing food for the table. How would I ever have time, in addition to all those tugs going on for my time and my consciousness, think about how I can work towards awakening in this lifetime? Well, that's what I'm going to try to answer. I first became aware of this notion of awakening, Advaita, Vedanta, duality's opposite, non-duality, because of a book I met and read and a study group from that book I've been in for the last 27 years, long before I met Sai Baba. The book is called A Course in Miracles. I don't know that it's controversial among Sai Baba devotees, but it is controversial in some parts of the world because it takes the concept of spirituality from a traditional Western, Christian, Jewish, Islamic perspective and turns it upside down. In other words, its only purpose is to help teach people about the lesson of awakening to your truest self, about non-duality, about Advaita. Well, it was in 1989, after a crisis in my life, and we all have crises, so I'm not standing here alone. I was smart enough to realize I needed help. I turned to the church group I was in. They had a book club, and we started reading A Course in Miracles. By the way, coincidentally, just about the same time, maybe a year or two later, I'm not quite sure, across town, a woman I didn't even know, in a different Course in Miracles group in Cleveland, Ohio, Jody Cleary, was studying the very same book. That book led both of us, there's no mistake about it, to Sai Baba, which I'll tell you about in a second. The book came out in the mid-'60s. It really wasn't published till the late 60s. It was a weekend, it was a regular weekly study course for me. People would say, yeah, I've done the Course in Miracles. It's about 1,000 pages long. I found it difficult to read. Some people find it easy, but they think they've done the Course in Miracles. In other words, the purpose of the book is to bring non-duality to Westerners. That's unheard of in the West. For those of you who were raised and are still practicing in the Hindu religion and come from India, you might not understand that, but it's intolerable for many people in the West who follow Christianity or Judaism. Furthermore, it's blasphemy. Furthermore, it's heresy. So those are pretty big strikes against it, and it really makes you step out of your comfort zone to agree to lend an ear or an eye to study what it really means to be at one with God, which is what Advaita is. The book was a perfect setup for both Jody and me to find Baba. If I recall correctly, and I should have her up here to speak for herself, the book became a little dry, as books can do, for her after many years, and she wanted to find the living embodiment of such a philosophy. And she found him in Sai Baba. And because I met her, and she's now my wife, a short time after we met one another, Baba became my guru. I paid sort of a little bit of lip service for a while because I wasn't quite sure I understood, let alone could follow some of his teachings, but I got there. And that'll be coming up a few seconds later. Anyway, she wanted more, and she found it with Baba. I wanted more, and I poured myself into A Course in Miracles, and the study groups have been a part of my weekly life since 1989. Last week, I went to my latest Course in Miracles group in San Diego. There's courses all over Los Angeles. I would guess there might be 20 here. There's a good number in San Diego. They're all over the world for spiritually minded Westerners who have never known the concept of oneness. Or to put it another way, never know the greatest lesson Baba's put out for all of us to rise to in this lifetime, I want to point out. So on that trek, on that journey, I found myself getting on an airplane and going to Talheim, Germany, to visit with a woman reputedly reported to be an avatar. Very sweet, very dear woman whose name is Mother Mira. She travels the world based out of a couple of locations in Germany. She's Indian, but she lives in Germany, and she gives darshan. She's just here in Los Angeles a couple of months ago. Jody and I went. We followed her around the world. We've been to see her in Germany a couple of times, and when I was anyway, and when I was with her and had her darshan, I found out through the grapevine that you could actually get on the telephone, and even though she never spoke, she doesn't speak to anybody, she doesn't give discourses. When you go to her darshans, they're stone quiet. I'll tell you more about that later, but I mean, if you want to know, but the point is she doesn't talk. However, I found out that if you call her on a Thursday afternoon, she'll answer whatever questions you have through her associate, Adi Lakshmi. So I got on the phone and I called her the next day and I said, Adi Lakshmi, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Mother Mira, thank you for the opportunity to come to your darshan yesterday. I have one question. And I didn't expect her to know how to answer it for me, but I blurted it out anyway, or part of it. I never got the whole question out. I said, I think I'm going to be off to see Sai Baba in India for the first time in my life, Sri Satya Sai Baba. And before I had the chance to ask the question I intended to, I heard Mother Mira in perfect English say out loud and then repeated by Lakshmi, "Go, he is God." That was a door opener for me. I knew so little about Baba, except from what I was gleaning from Jody, being a brand new student to Baba. Lo and behold, I thought an avatar I had the privilege and the honor of reading about and meeting in Germany would never say, "Go, leave me, leave here, go to Sai Baba, he is God." So I was very, very grateful for that opportunity. I'm a slow learner. As I said, I rarely got beyond a C. I need to really struggle with lessons. And this is how I learned about Sai Baba. Long stories short, because I am a journalist and I can't exaggerate. I used to say it was 19 times we've been to India to see Sai Baba. Jody corrected me that it might be 17 or 18 times. It's still a lot of times. We've had wonderful interchanges with Baba. Some great interviews, always great lessons, always great emotional and spiritual awakenings. I guess that's not an improper word to feel in his presence. And on 2 occasions over the years that we had these meetings with him, I mustered up the courage to ask him right to his face. Once when I was there without Jody, once when I was there with Course in Miracles students from Cleveland, Ohio. We all got invited into the interview room because of Jody. Baba went right up to her and said, "How many? 18? Go!" Where it was 12, I think. We were a total of 18 maybe. And the questions I asked him were the same questions on 2 occasions because I couldn't contain myself. I was there for one reason. And actually, I think Jody was too. It was because of the teachings of Advaita. And I wanted to know the creator of the universe, the creator of the oneness, view on that. So I asked him, Baba, are you the author of A Course in Miracles? Yes. Twice he said that. And on one of those occasions he added 5 simple words extra. Best book I ever wrote. Well, that did it again. These awakening periods, and I've decided that is an appropriate word to use, awaken me like somebody blaring a symphony in my ears and shining a spotlight in my eyes. You can't misread that. And you can't misunderstand it. And you know you're onto something big. And you know it might take you another 10 lifetimes, but you don't care anymore. You know you're on the radar of the Lord, the radar of God Almighty, and just keep plugging away regardless if you're a C student or an A student. It needn't matter. Well, I found a couple of quotes along the way. We've all have our favorite quotes and lessons or messages from Baba. And I'm going to read just a couple of them. They won't take very long. The first one's the longest. Forgive me for that, but the rest are very, very short. Some of these I've learned from some of my favorite Sai devotees in the world, Sai Youth. I wish there were more of them around today. Maybe that day will happen again. I lament that. And what I'm leading up to saying is, as a journalist even, I cannot vouch for the origin of all these, but I can tell you that I'm told they come from one of 3 sources. Baba's letters, a lot of people have been able to read those and reread those. Baba's discourses that are, I think, all typed up all over the world now. And Baba's interviews, face-to-face interviews. And I just gave you a quote that I know to be from Baba because I heard it with my own ears. Best book I ever wrote. Now, he may have been saying that to an audience of 1. He may have been meaning something different for anybody else who heard that. That I can't say. But these are quotes about the subject that I'm here to talk about, that I've decided to make it the only subject left in however many years Baba gives me. So the first one goes like this, and many of you have heard this, but I know some of you haven't. My dear children, there is no longer time for slumber. You have been asleep and dreaming for thousands of lifetimes. If you do not awaken now, this chance may not come again for thousands more. Come with me. And you're very familiar with these words. Separation is no longer the order of the day. I separated myself from myself so that I could love myself more. That experience is finished. I want all my selves to return and to merge into the one self. I gave many of you, this is very important, it's very disturbing at first glance. I gave many of you the advantage of an unhappy childhood, including conflict or separation from your mother or your father. In doing this, I removed from you the temptation to become attached to human parents, and that left you with only one option, to become attached to me. Why do you not avail yourselves of this opportunity instead of continually seeking the relationships which can never satisfy you? Your deepest, innermost urge is to return to yourself, to love yourself, to become the being, awareness, and bliss, which is all you will ever be. Let go of the past. Stop trying to get from each other what you think you missed in childhood or in marriage. Stop trying to get what you think you missed in your childhood or in marriage. You will never find anyone who is enough. I have asked all my devotees to repeat the mantra, I am God, I am God, I am no different from God. And now I ask you specifically to follow that instruction. It will be more helpful than anything you can do. And in my own curiosity as a journalist, finding as many complimentary phrases to that order, that command of his, as I possibly could, I've come to the conclusion that he does not want us to wait until next 7th lifetime from now, but now, in this lifetime. I'll bet you right up here where I'm standing, there was a man who stood here many times before. Many of you know him. He's from Los Angeles, Chaudhry Valetti, cardiothoracic surgeon from Los Angeles. I interviewed him here at the Universal Studios in the hotel there when I following him because Jody brought his name to my attention in Cleveland, where he had come often to visit his niece. And when I think of Chaudhry today, I think of him in the likes of people I think of who remind me of him: Sarah Pavan, Venkat Kanabati, G.V. Venkatraman, Mr. Chakravarti, all these people who had, it would seem to me, just a natural ease to be with Baba, almost whenever they wanted to, although I know that would never happen, but it seemed that way to the outside Ted. Anyway, he came to our home in Cleveland one day to record a Souljourns interview, and we got talking about the subject of awakening. I think one of us asked a question, it's probably me, and he had a comment about this goal that we seek. Some of us seek. Some of you right here, right now, I think are there. And I'd like to find that out so I could interview you, because we all need your examples if you're there. He wanted to talk about awakening to your true self, and so he did, and he used a metaphor, or a little parable. He said, it's like the big, strong, burly man with a sledgehammer in his hand walking up to this towering granite boulder and whacking away at it to shatter it, to see if they could break it open. 7 and 8 times, not a budge, just vibrations that would hurt his hands, but nothing more. 10, 12 times, nary a whimper coming from that boulder. 17, 18 times, the 19th time was magic, and it would shatter. And the lesson, I believe, Chaudhry was trying to convey to us about awakening was duty. You know, many of you are sitting there thinking, Ted, what are you talking about? Baba's promised awakening to all of us. Moksha is our destiny. We have nothing to fear and nothing to worry about. And you're absolutely correct. He does give us the matter of choice as to when it might happen. What would you do when it comes to moving heaven and earth to be there now in this lifetime? We would do anything. What I don't think we realize is we can get there now in this lifetime. And I'll tell you why I feel so strongly about that just a little bit later from now. So Chaudhry really gave me a wonderful lesson in that, because I didn't know duty would be so difficult. That brings me back to what Mike Congleton is responsible for in my life. The worst Christmas I've ever experienced, ever, in my 72 years. Actually, it was more or less like my 68 years at that time. 65 years, in Puttaparthi, India. It was the Christmas Mike ruined it for me by giving me such a magnanimous, enormous invitation that I couldn't say no to. I was filled with fear. I was filled with concern. I was filled with the lack of feeling worthy on any level. And part of my fear was that I've known stories of Baba inviting people to speak and then at the last minute shutting them down. No, don't speak. I didn't know how much I was going to risk putting myself out there and trying to come up with the right words. And I was thinking of Phyllis Crystal. You know, she died at 102, and in her late 90s, Baba asked her to come and speak on Women's Day in Puttaparthi, only at the last minute to say, no, don't speak, don't speak. I didn't know I could handle that. And it was the worst Christmas I ever had. I was so scared, I was so nervous. I told Jody once this, and I can't believe I said it because I really meant it, but it's preposterous. I said, you know, if my car were parked outside of Roundhouse 1 where we're staying this Christmas, I would go out there right now, get in it, and drive home to Cleveland, Ohio. It's just the most ludicrous thought I guess I could have, but I really felt that desperate. And finally we talked again, and some of that fear and trepidation started to ease a little bit, and I finally put pen to paper, and I poured my heart out the best way I could to write the best talk I could about what Christmas means to me in front of Baba. And poor Jody. She had to hear me deliver it to her. And she was loving and compassionate, and added these words similar to them. I can't remember exactly what the words were. That talk will never do. And she knew me. She knew that that was a television, ego-filled, blustering television anchorman writing a public relations release about who Sai Baba is and what Prashanti Nilayam means to others. It had nothing to do with revealing the inside of my heart to those people on Christmas Day, let alone to Baba. It was very hard. I didn't sleep for a couple of nights. And I kept writing away, and I wrote a couple more times. And Ted, that won't do. Find out what you have to say to Baba. You need to say it now. So many people are never given this opportunity, and you have it. Use it. So I wrote again. And finally she said yes. I was so happy. I wrote the talk a couple of times, changing it wholly, like 100% each time I wrote it. And finally I came up with a theme that basically had two thoughts in it that made me feel like I could say something. What does a person say in front of Baba? You know, I know what educators say and ministers and retired physicists at Prashanti say, and people like Mr. Chakravarti would say, but what am I going to say? So I came up with two ways of giving this talk on Christmas Day that got Jody's approval, and I hoped and prayed it would have Baba's approval too. The first one was, I redefined the gift that Baba gave both of us as Souljourns. And I should tell you that Jody is Baba's intermediary in my life, because I had nothing to do with Souljourns. She came up to me one day, and I rattled off some fantastic number about the interviews I'd done on TV5 over 44 years, 38 years at TV5, about 10,000 interviews. And that's what anybody would do working that many years, almost a half a century. And she said, don't you think that as a journalist, working for all these years, doing all these interviews, you ought to occasionally think about doing an interview with Sai Baba devotees? And that started it 20 years ago. And the point that made it worth repeating to Baba was that I had it all wrong. I thought the value coming from interviewing people on a spiritual path who had real nuggets, real gemstones of spiritual insight about Baba was for the benefit of anybody else who saw these interviews, and I was completely wrong. And I told Baba right to his face, because I remember turning around and telling him it was because these were intended for me. This C student from Canton, Ohio, this slow-learning Ted, who wants something beyond his reach and doesn't know how to get it. I'm going to give this young man a vehicle where he can interview over 400 people and learn from their experiences with Baba. So that became the centerpiece of my 21-minute talk. And there was one other thing about my talk, too, that I noticed that Jody liked, and I decided it was so painful to get to this point, I might as well let it all hang out. I spoke directly to my fear. I had the most base fear concerns, the most kindergarten-esque fear concerns about this talk. I was worried about what others might think of me outside of the world of Sai Baba. I mean, I wasn't a big-time celebrity, I was a local celebrity. But the word does get back that, you're 6 and 11 o'clock anchorman who's been doing the news for up to that point about 35 years. Do you know he doesn't follow Jesus? Do you know he follows this, for all I know, it's a cult located in India with this fuzzy-haired man who's leading everybody down the wrong path? I was fearful of that happening. In fact, years ago, Baba gave me this ring, and he hit me on the heart 3 times, good heart, and then on the shoulder 3 times and whispered in my ear, be careful. Many jealous around you. And so, for mercenary reasons, as well as for fearful reasons, I went like this with my ring and turned it inside out for years, because I didn't have the courage to show Baba in the form of this emerald ring the way it was meant to be shown, until that Christmas Day. And that's the other thing. I learned to finally confront my fears about my feelings of Baba. And the very first line of my talk that I tried to deliver with the greatest emphasis I could, because I not only really meant it, but I wanted people to know I really meant it. So I stood up, did my pranams to Baba, and said to the world and to those assembled, "Joy to the world, the Lord is come. We are among the happiest and the luckiest people on earth today." I said to them, "We get to be on Christmas Day in 2008 in Prashanti Nilayam with Jesus himself. 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, 'I and my Father are one. The one who sent me will come again. Ladies and gentlemen, he has come again.'" And I felt a weight being lifted off my head. A weight that had been with me since way before I ever heard Sai Baba's name. My courage grew, and as a resolute determination settled into my heart to know Baba as he really wanted me, not as Ted from Cleveland, Ohio, not as Ted the anchorman, not as Ted the dutiful wife to Jody, but as self. And that's the only lesson I hope I can begin to communicate, as impossible as it is, to anybody who's willing to listen. And then, 7 minutes into my 21-minute talk, an enormously bizarre, strange turn of events took place. And I think Jody's probably amazed that I have the courage to talk about it, because it's something I guess I should be ashamed for. But I've reconciled all the ups and downs in my life with Baba over and over again. And it's easy to be thankful for all the wonderful blessings in your life. It's a little more challenging to be equally thankful for those things that bring pain to your life. Well, 7 minutes into my talk, pain was brought into my life when I turned around to look at Baba's smiling face. And what did I see? I saw him gesticulating to the boys to turn his wheelchair around and wheel him out of Sai Coleman Hall. And he did. He left. "Baba, what did I say?" "Baba, I'm sorry for my mistake." "Baba, how did I hurt you?" "Baba, should I go on with my talk?" "Baba, I'm so sorry." Believe it or not, I said all those things to me vividly in my head. At the very same time, I'm continuing to deliver my talk to the 30,000 people inside Sai Coleman Hall. Jody said I didn't skip a word, but she noticed the air went out of my heart. She noticed a flatness in the atmosphere because of the crushing blow I must have felt, and in fact I did feel, when I turned to see Baba leave the floor. Two or 3 minutes later, I turn around and there he comes wheeling back into the floor. Big Cheshire cat smile on his face. Couldn't have been warmer, couldn't have been more loving without saying a word. I went on to finish my talk. I bowed down to him. He patted me like I was his beloved puppy dog, his beloved Cocker Spaniel puppy dog. He patted me, and I felt so good because I was a child. And whether you sit here today at the age of 27 or 97, we are all child. We are all children of Baba. And he wants us all to become self, the one self. And that leads me to a shorter second quote from Baba that some of you may be familiar with. "My mission is to raise the consciousness of man to a level at which he neither rejoices nor mourns over anything. You must not only have freedom from fear, but freedom from hope and expectation. Trust in my wisdom, I do not make mistakes. Love my uncertainty." How many thousands of times have you heard that? Love my uncertainty, for it is not a mistake. It is my intent and will. Remember, nothing happens without my will. Be still. Do not even want to understand me. Boy, did he really mean this, because he repeated it several times. Do not ask to understand me. Relinquish understanding. Relinquish the imperative that demands understanding. So I've given that up. I'm no longer trying to figure you out, Swami. I can't figure myself out. It's so confusing, this world of duality, non-duality. I'm using duality to get to non-duality because I don't know what else to do. And my message to you, Jody's right. There's nothing I can say about it that makes any sense. It's very difficult. But what keeps us going is we continually running into people who are there, if not in total, at least in part. The key line here is nothing happens without my will. It was a doctor at the super specialty hospital in Vrindavan who once told me of a devotee who confessed to Baba face to face all the negative actions and negative thoughts of his life. He confessed those all to Baba. And this person said that Baba's reaction to him after hearing his confession of all these negative things and all these negative thoughts was, "Don't worry, for I have willed them." Don't worry, Baba, for you have willed my negative thoughts, my negative actions? That doesn't make sense, trying to understand Baba. There's no logic there, trying to fathom Baba. We got to, I've said years as a journalist, I learned this little metaphor. If we could only raise the camera lens higher and higher and higher over the issues we're trying to figure out, and let a little time pass, like 300 years or 600 years, everything makes sense. Same for us right now. Don't worry, for I have willed them. The translation of that must be that they're not sins, they're not misdeeds, they're opportunities to learn your one and only genuine identity. That's how I take it. And if I'm wrong, Swami, come to my dreams and tell me the right way to take it. It's such a difficult task Baba has given us, but he's adamant to know his one and only message, that we too are God. I work on this one bite at a time. I do this in one way by examining the Leelas of my life. I'm so tickled to understand what Leelas had to be all about. Synchronicity is easy to understand. Chance is easy to understand. A coincidence is easy to understand. A Leela? A prank from God? Yeah, that's exactly what they are. And I take it even one step beyond that, as I'll explain here. Baba says Leelas are divine pranks. He says about Leelas that all is the play of the Atma. And I say, pay attention to the play. That word play has two meanings. It's the drama, the movie, the sketch, the Broadway play that we're acting in. That play is valid, and that play needs to be understood too. It's a play. And the second meaning, the way I look at it, is it's play. It's not work. It's play. Once you start to see the Leelas, they become playful, even the painful ones. I'll tease you with a couple of my Leelas only because I have the microphone. We all have them. In fact, we have hundreds, maybe thousands. But I missed most of mine because I was asleep at the switch. I didn't know to look to recognize them, and now I know. And I'm delighted every time they happen. One happened 3 nights ago preparing for this talk, which I'll get to if time allows. Anyway, this is one of the Leelas in my life that Jody will chuckle at. 20 years ago in the Sai Baba group that I started going to on a weekly basis, I was in Course in Miracles group, Sai Baba group, same time. We decided we were going to go see Sai Baba. And we went around the room one night, close to the time of the departure of the airplane, and people would say one after another, okay, I'm set to go. I've got my passport, I got my visa stamped, and I've got my tickets. All the way around to me. I don't have my passport, I don't have my visa, I don't have my tickets. Ted, aren't you worried? Ted, you should be really concerned. Pray to Baba. Ted, do something. And I stood up. You know, anybody in television news, I hope they're all forgiven for being arrogant. I was at my greatest arrogance when I stood up and said, I'm a reporter. I know how to work the system. I've traveled before. I know how to do this. I'm going to see Sai Baba come hell or high water. Please excuse my language. That's exactly what I said. And I heard this loud gasp from the 15 or 20 people, from Jody. I wasn't quite sure why that didn't go over with people, because I knew I could work the system. I knew I was going to go see Sai Baba with everybody. I could call the congressman's office and have this done in a flash. So I went home and went to bed that night. Am I leaving something out? I went to bed that night, and about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I get up to go to the bathroom, and the next thing I know, my eyeball is looking at a intricate pattern of threads that are blue and yellow and red. I was looking at the carpet on the floor. I had fallen. I had fainted for the first time in my life. I'm not a small guy. This 6'3", I won't tell you the weight, person fell and collapsed on top of his left ankle, shattering the ankle, requiring a plate and several pins for it to be repaired. I was not going to see Sai Baba. Nobody was more shocked than me. I really was looking forward to it. It would have been my first time to see Sai Baba. I started to learn the lesson that nobody speaks for Baba, nobody presumes to know what's going to happen that Baba wants to happen until it happens. It was a tough lesson for me, but one of the most joyful parts of it was the Leela that right before Jody was to take off with her friends to go see Baba, she came over to visit me at my house, and she saw my cast up to my knee, fiberglass cast, and she brought this card. She brought, I'll put it here so maybe some of you can see it. It's Baba's calling card with the gold lingam. Yes? Oh, it's so tiny it's not going to be seen much. Jody, by the way, has these here, golden lingam cards. She's got a whole pile of them with the interpretation of what it's all about, and they're out there somewhere? Okay, they're out on one of the tables out there. I didn't know she was bringing them until today. She took this card, not this one, the real one's home on our altar. It's starting to fade now. And she stuffed it, she just put it inside the fiberglass cast, up against gauze. This is wintertime. There's no condensation, there's no moisture, there's no humidity in the house. It's perfectly dry. The next morning I get up and I pull it out and it is drenched. It's like somebody took a can of water and poured it all over the card just as I was about to pull it out. And I was just totally flummoxed. I still don't know what it means. The second morning I got up and I pulled this out, and it wasn't pouring like it was the day before. Instead, from the lingam on down, in the form of a perfect triangle, maybe somebody knows what the symbolism there means, down to the base of the card was a fine spritz mist, like somebody went in a perfect triangle. And in the next morning, there were a few droplets of water, and then nothing after that. I still don't know what it meant. I knew it was a Leela of some sort, and I was very grateful that once again I felt like I was on Baba's radar in a way that I wouldn't have wished. But there was consolation in knowing that the Leela is for your best benefit. And I now know that the Leelas, good ones and not so good ones, are to help us to awaken to ourselves. Years later, after maybe 6 months after Jody had surgery, a bunch of us went to see Baba. He came up to Jody and said, interview. So we all went into the interview room. And, I'm the wily, eagleful journalist who knows how to position myself well, so everybody's sort of struggling in, and I go make a beeline right for his chair and sit right in front of the chair, and I stand up because I see him walking towards me, and Baba comes from the front door and comes right up to me and says, "How is wife's left eye?" And I almost blurted out, "Baba, who told you about Jody's surgery?" I'm glad I didn't. These are meaningful, humorous pranks. But the emphasis should be on the word meaningful. And they happen all the time. When I was at TV5 for 35 years, I left there after 38, a boss took me out to dinner. I had 5 general managers over that many years, and the 4th one took me out to dinner. We had a nice dinner, talked about news. He said, "Oh, one more thing before you go, Ted. Before you go back to work. I want to ask you a personal question." "Sure, go ahead and fire away. Anything's game." "What is your passion?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "What is your passion?" And I said, "I've never had that question asked of me." It's not a hard question to answer, but you might not want to hear the answer. It's not news. It's not television. It's not ratings success. My abiding passion is spiritual pursuit. He seemed to get it. He seemed to understand. And within a second, he said, "Well, don't you think for a young man," well, I wasn't a young man, but who had been working for 35 years, #1 in the ratings for many of those years, anchoring the 6 and 11 o'clock news, ought to have a say at least once in a while in some of the news that he covers on the shows he's anchoring? Starting Friday night, I want you to have a weekly series on spiritual pursuit. Name it anything you want. Heart and Soul is a good name. Interview anybody you want from any spiritual tradition you want. Put it in your own words and start doing that until you leave the station." And I did. Like many other instances, I knew that was Baba. That was a Leela. I've never heard of anybody being asked that before. The last one isn't so funny or humorous. I really do believe that the great pain that comes into all of our lives, not one of us is spared, is something in the end when we raise that lens high enough and I'll have enough time pass by that all we can do is say, "Thank you, God." That's helped to awaken me to my truest identity. That what I'm thinking about are some of the final words my father ever gave me. He died just before his 89th birthday, and this is relatively close to that time, although he was healthy right up to the time he died. He was an outstanding man of God, a great Catholic. He was a wonderful father. There were 6 kids, and never once did I hear of a single occasion where he raised his voice, raised his hand, raised his temper, or used profane language of any kind, or got angry with any of us, ever. Having said that, I didn't talk to him about it, but I knew he was not terribly happy that I got divorced in 1989, and when I remarried, that I didn't go to the trouble and the law of the church to have my first marriage annulled, scrubbed clean and erased by the Vatican so that I would be in good standing to get married to Jody. But I did it anyway, and that was big for him. Furthermore, it was big for him that in his eyes, I tossed Jesus out of the window and replaced him with Sai Baba. He didn't want to hear any explanation. He didn't want to hear anything about how I felt in my heart. And I love Jesus. He didn't want to hear that. But he didn't show it to me until this day. And what he did was to quietly lead up to a sentence that was quite shocking. He said, "I just want you to know that my eternity in heaven will be forever darkened with the realization that my son will never be there." You know, your past life regression, when you have all these scenes run through your mind at the time you're in a life-threatening situation, maybe you're dying, maybe you're not. That's how I felt, and I wasn't sure how to respond. I took a real quick mental checklist. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel like storming out of the house, getting into my car and driving back up to Cleveland out of my dad's house. I only felt love for my dad. He was being the best Catholic he knew how to be. He believed that to the day he died, that his heaven eternally would be darkened knowing that I wouldn't be there. he's reassured me that that's not the case. And I'm very grateful. But I rose to the occasion that I felt comfortable with by not getting angry. And I now see that as a Leela too. All of these pranks, acts, humorous, not so humorous, mysterious, not so mysterious, playful, tragic, all of them are for our best interest. And that brings me to this third Baba quote about duty. Your duty is to abandon. That's all he said. Your duty is to abandon. Sri Satya Sai Baba. Abandon all of your plans, even the best ones. Abandon all the theories you cherish, the doctrines you hold, the ones you hold dear to your heart. Abandon. Abandon the systems of knowledge that have cluttered your brain in preferences that you have accumulated. And abandon the pursuit of fame, fortune, scholarship, superiority. Abandon the pursuit of all of these. They are all material, all of them. Instead, enter into the objective world after becoming aware of the Atma. Then you will realize that all is the play of the Atma. So just a couple of words. My alarm hasn't gone off yet. Let me see where I am time-wise. That's 37 seconds to go. That's just my reminder to start thinking about wrapping it up. But I do want to be out of here. Oh, I got just a couple of minutes before I'm told the hook comes out and grabs me off the stage at 5 o'clock. So I'll try to whiz through this. All is the play of the Atma. And now a little bit about Souljourns, because that's brought a lot of Leelas with it. And I think some of you people have never heard about, maybe most of you people have never heard about. Jody brought along some papers explaining what Souljourns is and how you can view it at souljourns.net, as Rohan talked about. It's been 19, 20 years. Yes, I know. Jody thought of this. The 400 plus interviews are there, hopefully for a long time to come. 95% of the interviews with Sai Baba devotees. The others are an extension of my career endeavor to broaden the base of understanding about spirituality in general. I've done interviews with Amachita, the Hugging Saint, Amashri Karunamai. I've got a second documentary in the works to be aired on the life of Mother Mira, who I talked about before. I post a new interview every 2 weeks. Most recent one that's been up for a week and a half now is with the Sai Youth, 28-year-old gentleman from Manchester, England. I did last year in England about where the Sai Youth have gone and why they have left. It's not necessarily an uplifting story. He is a Sai Youth, and he regrets what's happening, and he hopes Baba helps us all to change that among our youth. Several million people have seen these interviews around the world. According to Vimeo and YouTube, they've been seen in 150 countries. People from Tehran and Azerbaijan and other places write us and tell us that it's their only way of getting darshan of any kind, that state law, state religion is that you follow this or you could be arrested. And by watching Souljourns, it's helpful to them. Increasing numbers of viewers are non-devotees. They're non-devotees, which means that Baba's message, 90% of it's Baba, is being spread throughout the world, which I'm very happy about. Jody and I have not done a single thing to spread these talks. It's just word of mouth, and it takes off on its own accord. I continue to learn from each and every one of them. And in keeping with the theme of today's talk, I'd like to mention our newest discovery with Souljourns, and that is about 7 or 8 years ago, we started to realize that some of the people we were interviewing, increasing numbers of the people we were interviewing, were having experiences of realization, of moksha. Maybe for seconds at a time, maybe for a lifetime. Jody's dearest friend, Shivangani Bailey, died a Jivan Mukta. She didn't come to any spiritual understanding until the age of 50, and then 7 or 8 years later, she's gone. She died, fully in Baba's arms, while she was alive in this lifetime. Some of the people we've interviewed, as I said, Houston Smith in 1999, he was the first one because of the occasion of meeting Jody, understanding about Sai Baba, hearing her admonition to me to start recording people's interviews, and knowing that we had Houston Smith in common. unflappable human being, zero ego, total equanimity, total love, a towering intellect. I was very happy to grant us a wonderful interview. And that same time, up in Berkeley, we traveled a little farther north in the next couple of days to go up to Calusa. Most of you are probably familiar with the Vibhuti Amritam house in Calusa. Well, I wanted to see this. And I sat next to a man who was a complete stranger to me. Long story short, I said, "Can you help me talk to Ami Mangru here, who's the owner of the house? Because I'd like to do an interview." He'd be my second interview on this new project we're doing called Souljourns. He said, "It'll never happen. Don't even bother. Don't waste your breath." So I turned to him. His name is Sandy Nat. "Sandy, could I interview you?" He was there. He's about my age. He's a financial planner from Northern California. He was willing to talk about Sai Baba. He said, "Sure, come over to my house in Yuba City tomorrow." We went there. We entered the house. We started talking about Sai Baba. I only had to ask really 2 questions. I asked some follow-up questions. How did you find Sai Baba in your life, and how did Sai Baba transform your life? Half of the hour and 25 minutes was devoted to how Baba proved to him, beyond a shadow of a doubt, his omnipresence and omniscience. The second half of the interview, he wept. He told me about meeting Baba. I did ask a question. "You mean at Prashanti you met Baba face to face?" "No. I met Baba about 12 feet from where you're sitting right now, Ted. In that room, I met Baba. He came to me on a Sunday afternoon here in Yuba City about 2 o'clock. I was resting, but I wasn't sleeping and I wasn't napping. It was daylight. And there he was. What did he do? He took me into the ethers, outer ethers, into the farthest regions of the universe. This went on for a long time. I'm making it very short. And he commanded me to create planets. And I did. And he commanded me to do away with them. And I did. Well, long story short, his life was forever changed, and he cried over it. And I say this only because he wasn't a plant. Baba planted him. He never invited me to interview him. He never dreamed he would share this story. These people we interview don't share their stories. That's the whole point. They're not trying to sell something or go in for an ego rush by having somebody videotape their stories. Somehow, I think I know how, we're guided to individuals and we invite them to share their stories, and they do, and Sandy did. He's another one I think has great signs of his own awakening. Wayne Dyer, the international spiritual author and lecturer from around the world. I saw his career change him. And I had a chance to interview him on 2 occasions, and on the second occasion, I just thought I would try this. I thought I knew him fairly well. I certainly saw his programs on PBS for many years. I remembered interviewing him back in Cleveland years ago, and I decided to ask him if he'd ever heard of the name Sai Baba before. Sai Baba? He comes to me all the time. And every time he comes to me, I cry. I'm crying right now, just thinking of him. He died, Wayne Dyer, within the last year, with a picture of Sai Baba on the bedstand next to where he died. His life changed as much as any person's I've ever seen in the business that I'm part of. From being a salesman, from being a performer, from being a celebrity, to being self. Shivangani Bailey, Jivan Bhukta, Father Charles Ugata, all he knows is love, love, love. Maria Hott, we just heard from her today, a registered nurse from Holland, who in her retirement sold everything, moved to Puttaparthi, started working immediately at the General Hospital years ago and is still there today. She's an Indian today. She gave up her citizenship and became an Indian. And what does she have to show for it? Absolutely nothing. She has no possessions. She has no attachments. Oh, she has Baba in her heart, but nothing else. And she's one of the happiest people we've ever met. The Pink Twins, Dorothy and Maya O'Brien, they're Baba's age. They were brought to Sai Baba by their mother. 20 years older than themselves. This is a story I like repeating. I heard it from a man who saw this happen. Baba came out, went into the interview room, and took with him the Pink twins. Never married, devoted their lives to Baba. Were still practicing Catholics, the faith I was raised in, towards the very end. And Baba came out of the inner room to the veranda and said to the gents there, to the doctors, to the professors, and to the VIPs from the world of Sai Baba, did you see those two women in there? They serve more than all of you combined. They serve with the mind. And I kind of have to feel that you know a little bit about the sweet taste of nectar called moksha, to be able to serve exclusively with the mind. Jack Hawley, I'll bet you he stood here a couple of times, maybe more than that. He used to live in Huntington Beach. He and his wife Louise had been to see Sai Baba for 6 months at a time for 35 years, and then they'd come home for 6 months at a time. He's the one who told us in the first interview, I guess it's our only interview with him, I don't know if it was Jody who asked the question or if I did, about his daily practice. Well, let me see, I get up, Ted. And before I have breakfast, I say Om Shri Sai Ram 10,000 times every day. I said, when do you have breakfast? At 6 p.m.? No, about 3 or 4 hours after I get up. We're going to see him in a couple of weeks up in Palm Springs. I'm going to ask him if he's still doing that. I check with him from time to time, and he continues to do that. Om Shri Sai Ram 10,000 times every morning. And the reason why I know he's there, even though he's there in the illusory physical form in Palm Springs, but he's really there in realization because of a question he answered when I asked him, what about your fear? How much fear do you have? That's always a good test of Baba devotees. I'm always curious because I have a load of fear. And he says, well, I have no fear. I don't think about it. I haven't thought about that in years. What do you mean fear? I said, Jack, everybody's got fear. No, I don't have any fear. Do you have fear of sickness, Jack? No. Do you have fear of losing one of your many children? Them dying before you and Louise die? No, not at all. I never think about it. Do you have fear of Louise dying? No. I ask him these questions. They're on Souljourns. Do you have fear of yourself dying? Oh, no. Do you have fear of a nuclear holocaust? No, not whatsoever. I have no fear. When you meet people who have been around Swami, it doesn't really matter if it's been for years, as is the case with Jack or with others, you start to feel there's something going on that we don't have to wait 25 lifetimes for realization. It can happen now. And that's what I was trying to impart to you about the insights that Jody and I gleaned from doing so many interviews. We're meeting people. They're not all Baba devotees. I'll butcher this name, and I don't mean to. Maharani Prithvi Bir Kaur. Jody's nodding her head. She's a rugged individual. She's a tough-talking woman. She's strong in her beliefs. She loves Baba. And she's gone now. But while we knew her and interviewed her, I got the distinct feeling I'm talking to a person who's not from this world now. Don Mario Mazzolini, somebody asked me about the priest who was excommunicated by the Vatican for one sin. He loved Sai Baba. He wrote a wonderful book about Sai Baba in which he printed the letter he wrote accepting his excommunication from the church. He died a short time after I interviewed him. And if you just watch that interview, you'll see love personified. Even though he speaks only in Italian, he spoke to an interpreter during the interview, right before he died. Phyllis Crystal, you all know her. She died at 102. She gave me a great privilege of being able to interview her for, I don't know, maybe the 5th or 6th time, to be in her presence with the camera. Pretty much on the eve of her 102nd birthday in England. She died a short time thereafter. I don't have to tell you the reasons why I think she was an awakened child of God. They were pretty obvious. Christian Maves, the professor of medieval Italian and literature at Notre Dame University, who was the interpreter for Don Mario Mazzoleni. He went to school at Harvard and Columbia. He's a worldwide leading authority on the life of Dante, the great poet of the Middle Ages, who said this at one point, of 1,000 wise utterances: "Consider your origins. You were not made to live as brutes, but to follow virtue and knowledge." That's how I think of Christian Mays, an ardent follower of Sai Baba. Dr. Venkat Kanabati, his 40 plus interviews with Baba, total egoless, total humility, compassion, and love. Alan Morlock, another person who's many, many times been to see Sai Baba. He's a mystic of the highest caliber, in our opinion, because of the chances we've had to meet him and talk with him and sit with him and learn from him about Baba. He runs a business mowing lawns so that he can live well enough to go to Puttaparthi every year for years. Sundar Iyer, many of you know him. He's a close friend of ours. Maya, his wife, Baba's assistant for 2 years, and as close in the inner sanctum as you could be in his room. Sundar Meyer, we've been over his house to dinner with Maya. He doesn't have a single image of Baba in his house. I don't know too many devotees like that. I'm sure there are some. And I asked him why. He says, "Dad, don't you get it? He wants you to be him, because that's who you are." And I felt like if I'm going to really practice this seriously, I'm not going to put an objective image of my teacher out there when he's not out there. He's me. Arthur Hillcoat, I'm going to wrap this up by just going down the line. Arthur Hillcoat, Vijaya Kumari, interesting about her, she's one of the most humorous, realized people I think I could ever meet in 1,000 years. She's been with Baba since the day I was born, quite literally. As a young girl in 1945, when I was born, she was with Baba in Puttaparthi in 1945. Well, you all know about Vijaya Kumari. 2 great interviews with her. Yogesh Patel from England, just a wonderful young man, wonderful beyond description with his awareness, his awakening. Drew Decker, who's the head of the Course in Miracles group that I go to in San Diego. He's getting married. He's probably married today already down in San Diego. Srirag Balaji Srinivasan. Srirag's our pal from Perth, Australia, who's put Souljourns on the map. As I said, we never spent a penny. We didn't know how to market it. We don't know anything about promotion. Out of the blue one day, 6 years ago, he sends me an email. "You don't know me, but Swami sort of told me," this came later, Swami sort of told me to construct a website for Souljourns. I know you got one, but take a look at mine. I sent it here. It was fantastic, 10 times better than anything I could ever do. We thought he was this wise old 65-year-old engineer from Perth who loved Baba and was going to help us out of the generosity of his being. He was a 16-year-old kid who built this website before we even knew about it and gave it to us sight unseen, and it's still on today at souljourns.net. While I was interviewing him on a Skype interview not so many weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, later he confided in me that he's been having these experiences of moksha, of awakening, as an ardent follower of Baba, and that during the interview, he was going through one of those periods. This is weeks after I interviewed him. It's just a wonderful story. Same thing happened with Miles Williams, who's never heard of Sai Baba before, and told me about his awakening when we were in Ojai, California. Interviewed him a second time, and he said, "Remember I told you about this feeling of bliss that I had last year? I'm having it now, Ted." And it wasn't because of the interview. He's far too sophisticated for that. And I'll end on this. An unnamed person who I interviewed and I put up on Souljourns. It's there if you want to go find it. I won't tell you too much more because I respect his privacy for the reasons I'll share with you now. He was at a Course in Miracles meeting. Drew Decker wasn't there. I was sort of like the de facto facilitator, and we're reading a passage on non-duality. And I said out of the blue, has anybody ever tasted the sweetness of bliss of non-duality, as the book says is our true identity? And this fellow raises his hand, and he's shy, and he's sheepish, and he's studious, and he's maybe 28 or 30. Well, tell us about it. And he did. He told us about bliss. So I told Jody, and I said, we have to interview him. And we did. It's a wonderful interview. Totally spontaneous. Would never ask to be interviewed. Never want to share this. But that got through to him somehow, because it has to do with this idea of Leelas. Baba, I'm sure of it, gave me a Leela because he knows, and he's known for hundreds of years, that I would be talking on this day about our quest for oneness, and that's where we want to put all of our attention as much as we can right now. So the Leela came in the form of a letter I got from this fella who said, I would like you to send a reference letter if you could, if you would. You don't have to, but I'd deeply appreciate it since I got to know you a little bit. Would you send a reference letter to the university up in Palo Alto, where I'm going, because I want to get my PhD there in transpersonal psychology. He sent me his statement of purpose, which is several pages long. I just want to read you a paragraph. That's where the Leela is for me. My spiritual journey began very early in life. I have always had an inner knowing about the unchanging eternal self, though I can argue that the real work began when I experienced an awakening in 2010. Since then, I have done a lot of transpersonal work, mostly forgiveness, as well as exploring the depths of my subconsciousness. The aperture through which I have viewed my experience of spirit has changed, and it has evolved as I myself realize more truly who I am. I have studied myriad philosophies, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, which served to open myself to a more expansive view of reality. I am currently focusing on allowing to trust completely in letting go of the duality perspective. The journey has been challenging, but the results and experiences I've had in the past year have been increasingly liberating, and I intend to keep true to my path wherever it may lead me. I believe I have a duty to others to try and bring this knowledge forward. Don't we all? J. Sai Baba. Thank you. I doubt if we have time for questions. I'm sure people are hungry. I'm 15 minutes over my allotted time, but I wanted to end on one quote from my Sai Baba group in Cleveland, in San Diego, from a couple of weeks ago, from last week, from our study circle with Sharon and Sam Weiss and company at their house. Baba's quote: as long as there is distinction in the mind between God and I, as long as there is distinction in the mind between God and I, there is no bliss. There is no bliss. There is no happiness in duality. Sai Baba.